Hey guys, welcome back. In today's episode, we are sans guest. It's just myself and Tom going to be discussing various things. So we're going to be talking about our journeys into photography, why it's important to build a good support network, and whether technology hinders or enables creativity. So sit back, open your ears, and enjoy. Okay, we're live.
We've really got to stop starting everything with, oh, so, hey, okay. How are you guys?
Where's our guest, Tom? What have you done with them?
So they are in the back of the van. No, we don't have a guest this week. We thought, because we have such wonderful listeners, that you might want to find out a little bit about us, maybe, or maybe that's just our egos getting in the way. But we wanted to do one of just us chatting. Isn't that right?
Yeah, well, we had some feedback that said it would be nice to kind of hear from you guys and introduce who you are, because frankly, I've started listening to your podcast and I don't know who the hell you are or why I should be listening.
A bit harsh.
I don't think it was worded quite as harshly as that.
I was going to say a bit harsh of my mum to send in that feedback. But yeah, in all seriousness, I thought it'd be quite interesting, really, because actually, listeners probably aren't aware, but we've only ever actually met face to face once.
Indeed.
And that
was in an alleyway.
That was a regret. Oof. Now we've just fallen into a podcast together. How awkward.
It genuinely was in an alleyway, though, wasn't it?
It really was, in a very, very windy alleyway. You had just photographed a politician, I think.
Yes, I believe I'd photographed Diane Abbott.
I think that's probably right. And then I think I had probably been up for meetings or something. And we had a very nice cold drink in a very cold alleyway, as is quite often the case in London.
Like two tramps. Yeah.
We weren't at a pub. We were literally drinking cider on some steps. So we went for this drink. But what's interesting, and why I wanted to kind of bring that up, is that I think for years and years and years, I, like many photographers, had almost thought of other photographers as the enemy. And so a couple of years ago, I started reaching out to good people like yourself, and it's been wonderful, really, because we have some pretty decent discussions off air. Obviously, when it comes to hitting the record button, the quality of the discussion drops slightly. But
I think photography is one of those careers that can be you're very much in a bubble. You're not necessarily relying on colleagues, or you don't really have colleagues as much as you might work with clients, but you're not always you don't always get the sense that you're part of a team. And so it's interesting to actually talk to other photographers, because you can relate to things that only another working photographer could relate to in some ways. And I mean, that, if we're honest, that's why we kind of started the podcast as well, wasn't it? We wanted to actually have something. We didn't feel like there was anything out there that was catering to working photographers, but also other people in the photo industry. It's such can be so closed off, and people can be quite coy and a bit guarded, that I wanted to break down those walls a little bit and make it a little bit more transparent and actually discuss stuff, because I think the more that we're open about the trials and tribulations of our career choice, the more understanding there is, the more collaboration there will be, the stronger that the whole industry becomes.
Yeah, I mean, I thought we started the podcast because you blocked me online and it was the only way of us getting together. But obviously I was wrong. But yeah, no, you're right. I think if we all feel like we've been through some situations and are all super unique, whereas actually when you get together with other photographers, you go, oh, you've had that too. How did you deal with it? And then you kind of go, everyone's dealt with things in slightly different ways. And you kind of go, oh, I don't know I wouldn't do it like that. But that's interesting how he dealt with it. And we have that. All of the struggles and all of the kind of the things, because it is a very lonely career. In a weird way, we're probably the most sociable people, but in the loneliest possible way. So getting together with other photographers has been fascinating. Well, personally for me, fascinating. You're probably regretting it right now, but for me, it's been super interesting because I've never been told how, or not even been told. I've never even learned how other people have different processes and stuff like that. And so for me, I had a very set way of working. And having now over the past couple of years chatted to different photographers, my way of working has completely changed. It's evolved and become like a weird meshy hybrid of the 30 or 40 photographers I've met up and had drinks with. You know, I kind of go, oh, he does it that way. That's a really good way of doing it. I would never have thought about doing it like that. So for me personally, it's been fantastic.
I think it's all useful to kind of shift your perspective as well, because otherwise we get stuck in ruts. And to see, you know, how they talk a lot in photography now about the kind of the male gaze, the female gaze, etc. And there's obviously a lot of questions at the moment about diversity and representation in photography. I think it's really important that photographers do have these discussions and chat, because otherwise it can be quite easy to get stuck in your lane and to have your blinkers on, you know.
And also, I think even just from you get commissioned for a certain look or a certain style, you fall into that rut even more so, because you end up doing the same thing over and over. It's almost little bit like Groundhog Day, because you get known for one look. I had that very early on in my career, and I just got pigeonholed really kind of like really badly. But at the time, I didn't realize. So I kind of just kind of went with it, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, I really enjoy shooting bands in a dark forest. And you know, then I kind of woke up, if you will.
I really want to get down now then to the origin story of how you found yourself photographing bands in dark forests.
Well, let me tell you, bands haven't got much money, and forests tend to be free to shoot in.
Good tip. Tip number one there, folks.
That's it, damn right. So no, my origin story, apart from obviously, you know, getting given a camera by my dad when I was about 5, I moved to Sheffield to go and study economics, because, you know, I thought I was far more intelligent than I actually was. And I ended up falling in with a couple of bands in Sheffield. Was at Arctic Monkeys' like first ever pub show. You know, and I'd had a lovely time just becoming a bit of a music photographer. Didn't really thought of it as a hobby really at uni, and then started getting paid, started getting flown around. And then I was like, oh, whoops. And then I was out on photographing Slipknot in America, my final year of uni. And I get a phone call from the head of faculty going, Tom, she's a woman, by the way. She's got a very deep voice. And she said, Tom, you need to know that we're going to kick you off the course. And I went, oh, damn. And at that point, I just went, my parents are going to kill me, full on kill me. Where are you? And I said, well, I'm in America currently on a job. And she goes, oh, yeah, I did think I got an international dialing tone. What are you there? And I was like, what are you there doing? And I said, I should probably mention they were going to kick me off the course because my attendance was about 9 or 10%, and the cutoff was like 13. I was like, the cutoff is 13%. That's not exactly the highest standard you've set for yourself, is it? But anyway, so I was in America, in Kansas City, which is interestingly in Missouri, not in Kansas. Learned that, and pretty much that alone on that trip. And yeah, so I had that phone call, and she said, you know, where are you? I said, I'm out with Slipknot. And she said, oh, they're my son's favorite band. And I was like, okay, well, look, I'll see what you do, see what I can do. So ended up getting something signed. She sent me a bit of coursework. I managed to get my coursework done and in whilst working through the night in a hotel in Kansas City. Flew back, and my attendance record went up to 13.5%. And I managed to, yeah. And then I attended every single lecture while I was back in the UK, and passed with a 2-1. No, 2-2. No. Third.
I'm trying to work out
2-2.
What the lesson is there. Is it something to do with bribery?
Yes, it's basically being incredibly charming on the phone. But yeah, so that's
amazing. So you basically you got to the point with it where it had taken over from, and I imagine she probably realised that if the fact that you had been flown over to the other side of the world in your third year to shoot a band that she'd almost certainly heard of.
Yeah, she also, she was very supportive. Actually, the whole uni were great. They were very, I've fairly certain they wanted me on the course. At the same time, they were like, look, if this is what you want to do, you should not in like an arsey way, but like follow your dreams.
Mm,
And I did.
that's amazing.
And that is how we ended up drinking in an alleyway near Waterloo. But yeah, so I basically, for me, I did that. I did the music stuff, and then I realized, I woke up and realized my passion wasn't in music photography, and my passion was actually working with like real people. Like real people, but everyday people, like everyday heroes, like members of the emergency services and stuff like that, and people, from the whole breadth of humanity, rather than kind of
Wanted a bit more variety, I guess, because
for
the music
sure,
industry can become a bit of a bubble in itself, can't it?
Well, I had a I think, what do they call it? They had like an epiphany when I was photographing a band, and they came in. I used to have a studio, and they came into my studio, and they were like, "Yo, dude," and I was like, "Hello, how are you? How's it going?" And he goes, "You're going to make me look so good, yeah? I'm going to get like really laid." And I was like, "Cool. And you've made me realize that my job currently here is not worth much, and I don't want to do it anymore. Ta-ra!" Yeah, I won't say who that was, but basically that was like a proper moment of clarity, and I was like, I do not want to be involved
in getting you laid.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm good. I thought, and that's when I kind of flipped the dial, and I got in touch with some NGOs that I just thought were doing amazing work, and I flew out to document, the people in various different areas of the world who are doing some actually amazing, incredible humanitarian work, and that made me feel considerably like, well, I felt, not made me feel, but I think it made me feel like my craft
had a better purpose.
Yeah, exactly. It was being
put to better use.
Exactly. But what about you? What was your kind of your origin?
No, we both studied courses outside of the photography realm. I studied history and war studies at King's College London, which was a strange course, to say the least. It was half history degree, half a war studies degree, which is a social science, and sounds quite like basically they're training you to become a dictator or something. But
it does a little, yeah.
And it certainly had some colourful characters on the course. People who were related to various military dynasties, and people who wanted to be lawyers, international lawyers, people who went off to become spooks, people who went off to do all sorts, I imagine. Very varied, very interesting bunch of people. And it was something really, because I didn't want to go and study photography because I wasn't sure at that point that it was something I could make a career out of. And I wasn't sure if it was like a short-term passion that I would kind of drop. But I only became more interested in it whilst I was at uni, and I started shooting for the student newspaper and started to shoot for some small independent magazines. And because I was in London, I had quite good access to various kind of events and demonstrations, and shooting portraits of quite interesting politicians or speakers or thinkers or writers. So I started to kind of get quite diverse little jobs out of it. And I'd always been quite passionate about photojournalism. So when I graduated, I kind of found myself slightly by accident covering the Israel-Hezbollah war in 2006. And in hindsight, it was a dangerous and slightly foolhardy thing to do.
Quite dangerous. Just a little.
I was there with a colleague who wanted to become a writer, and we kind of, we bought some flat jackets on eBay, and we were kind of going anyway for something
high
else.
Quality flak jacket.
Yeah, those acmeflatjacket.com. Yeah, I mean, it's not something I'd advise anyone to do, and in hindsight, it was very stupid and reckless and not ideal for my family or anybody.
Sure, full legal disclaimer here. Please do not buy armor on eBay.
Don't do as Greg did. So yeah, it was also a really important kind of experience for me to go through at that point. I think I did it did kind of give me a bit of an epiphany that I wasn't cut out to be a photojournalist, like a hardcore kind of photojournalist, and my kind of slightly romantic ideals of it were exactly that, and the realities of it were very, very different, and also the type of person you had to be to do it was perhaps something that didn't fit with me.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up kind of jumping around, continuing to do kind of documentary and photojournalism, did some stuff in former Yugoslavia in the run up to Kosovan independence, and I kind of ended up traveling in Syria and Lebanon and going over to Cuba for their kind of 50th anniversary. And I'd be quite interested to go places and document an actual story. And I guess from a historical point of view, I was always fascinated in being a witness to history unfolding. And it gave me an excuse to go and learn about somewhere and learn about a place. But I slowly also realized that I wasn't going to be able to pay my rent in London doing that. And I didn't have the courage to just up sticks and move somewhere cheap, which is what a lot of photojournalists end up doing and basing themselves like in the thick of the action. I kind of had one toe in it or 1 foot in it and 1 foot back in London. And so I ended up starting to do lots of other different types of photography to help pay the bills, and everything from weddings to PR work and drinks receptions and God knows what, all sorts. And what it taught me was that it doesn't really matter what kind of photography you're doing. You can still bring your own thing to it, and B, whatever you're doing photography wise and wherever you are in your career, you can still be learning. And I really kind of tried to use it as a way to teach myself lighting, to teach myself how to kind of deal with people, especially when you're doing portrait work. And it was kind of a way of learning on the job, which was super helpful, but at times demoralizing because it's a long slog. And I think that's the thing with photography. We're talking we've both been shooting for about 12, 13 years now. So
no, mine's a bit older. Yeah, 17.
Wow.
17 years. But I would really only consider maybe the past maybe
2 months.
2 months, 6 weeks. I was actually I'd probably only really consider the past 6 hours, my actual career. But no, I'd probably only consider the past kind of 5-6 years, like with kind of a focus in mind.
Yeah. And I think that's entirely fine. I think there's a lot of it's good to treat it as a marathon, not a race, and to not be too super impatient with it as a career, because you kind of have to enjoy it as it goes along and enjoy all the opportunities that arise from it. That's what's so amazing about trying to pursue it as a career, is all the opportunities that it will give you.
Yeah, I think for me, it was probably the first 11 years of my career were kind of me getting the technical stuff, because I'm never been taught or never attended lessons. And when I started learning, there was not all this stuff available on the internet and whatnot. It was just kind of starting to happen. None of these kind of YouTubers and bloggers who just focus on technique and stuff.
So talk to me a little bit about then your approach. You said that you kind of started to take things, you started to be a bit more focused with it. Talk to me about how your kind of approach perhaps has changed in the last 6 years then.
Well, that was probably around the same time I had the kind of the epiphany in the studio with that guy, and I basically wanted to go off and find, other people to photograph. I realized that I think I had focused in on possibly one of the most niche and small areas of humanity. You're like, even though obviously music affects our daily lives, really, as far as a world goes, it's very, very small. And it's, I still do from time to time, my friends at Kerrang might say, oh, do you want to fly to Italy and go and photograph Metallica? And you kind of go, yeah, great, I'll go and do that. But there's a lot of things that I won't do. And I really kind of just wanted to focus on photographing anyone else. And that was when I had a shoot in late 2014, early 2015, where I photographed an artist, a guy called John, who is such a lovely chap, like a medal reworker. And I had spent some time with him, and we shot a lovely set of portraits that I still love actually to this day. And that was kind of that one shoot, that one afternoon I spent in this guy's studio was the catalyst for the rest of my career. And I had that kind of like that moment of clarity, and I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to speak to real people and hear their stories, and I want to kind of almost bear witness to their lives, as opposed to just photographing 5 guys stood in a line. And I wanted to shoot more. And for me, that was such an incredibly important shoot. I look back on it so fondly, because like me and him were like proper kindred spirits. But he didn't make me realize, but I think I realized at the time. I was like, right, this is what I want to be doing. And I like you say, when you had your moment of that you realized that you maybe weren't cut out to be like a super hardcore photojournalist, you had that kind of moment as well.
And I think it's interesting, because I was going to ask you about whether or not, because this is something that people often talk about, do you take photos or do you make photos? And I think it's interesting when you're approaching stuff from a documentary perspective, as I was when I started my career, and then you move more into the commercial world, and you start by taking pictures, and then you have to learn to start making pictures. And the idea of how those two sit, because occasionally I still get documentary kind of jobs, and you have to put a different hat on, because you can't really go into make pictures in the sense of setting things up, because that isn't ethically sound when it comes to kind of documentary work.
Of course.
And I guess equally, from where you were, you almost kind of went a little bit the other way, because you were making pictures perhaps when you were doing the music stuff, but then when you started photographing real people, there's a bit of element of allowing it to play out, to take the picture, allowing the actual situation to play out more than having just somebody waiting for you to give them every little minor direction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was interesting, because it was the first time really for me I could have gone, I could just take a step back and just almost just watch something unfold. And I ended up doing these shoots and kind of going, that's great. Can you do that again? But let me get this set up. So I would watch it, and then I would make it. But yeah, I've never really, I did obviously a bit of taking pictures, I think, in the first couple of years of my career. But for me, then I pretty much since I've made, and I've always made a point of, even though I'm working with real people, they are kind of more heroic shots. They are kind of less documentation and more a kind of kind of, I want to put these people on a pedestal.
Yes. And you can tell that though, because of the lighting and the way that you light, and the fact that if something is lit, then it's obviously going to be a different approach.
Yeah, very much.
And I think this is why, to go back earlier to talking about how we kind of started and got into photography and learning lighting, I think why that's such an important thing for photographers to learn, because I met plenty of photographers who are fantastic photographers and aren't necessarily that kind of up on their lighting, and it doesn't matter too much for day to day. But if you start to do commercial work, it's something you have to be able to do, because you could be thrown into a situation where it's just not ideal. And light, at the end of the day, when it comes to photography, the actual visual side of photography is such a massive part of it. It's almost all of what it really is about, is light, creating emotion and creating mood and creating drama and telling the story. And if you can create your own light, then you can really start to get creative with the way that you actually approach things. And it's funny, because I know photographers, fantastic photographers, who are so up on their lighting, but their style looks very naturalistic, and they'll kind of get commissioned and they'll be like, oh, this is great, and they're back and forth with the art director or the producer, and they'll eventually get around to sending them their kind of lighting list, and they'll be like, what's this? And they'll be like, well, it's the it's the 12x12 that I need because we've got to shoot the blah 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 blah. And they kind of they'll be like, but you just shoot everything naturally lit, don't you? And at that point the penny drops. Actually, although everything looks like it's just they found it like that, this is something that this photographer has gone and created. Every little detail, like that little bit of dapple that's coming in and looks like the sun shining through a tree with leaves on it is actually created by some mad contraption with a bit of like
there's a B1 suspended
tape,
from a branch. Yeah, with a gobo
strapped to a big long stick or whatever. Yeah. So it's I think the lighting side of things is fascinating as in your journey into photography and how you develop that and then how you decide to use that within your own work and in your own style.
I think the lighting thing's super interesting. I think I'm now a couple of years into my career, but also I feel now that I see light in a different way. I feel like I can appreciate the qualities of it a little bit more. And so I bought basically almost one of every hard reflector for the ProPhotos B1s and B10s that I have. And I was like, right, I'm going to do tests. And this is what I've been doing in lockdown. So I've been setting things up, and I have a mannequin's head just with a clamp on underneath it. And I have a pad of paper. I write what modifier it is, what power, what distance, and what angle it is to the subject, and whether it's pointing at the subject, behind, in front, stuff like that. And then I keep a record, and I just basically do tests and find out how the light looks at different distances, different powers, stuff like that. And then I ended up getting rid of pretty much every modifier and keeping the OCF Magnum. And that's the only hard modifier I've kept out of pretty much all of them.
Wow.
And so for me, it's all about now. I'm going back to taking it all about the lighting.
Yeah.
And for me, I think it's always
streamlining.
Oh man, streamlining. Whoa, I was hoping you'd bring this up. We are now talking. We're cooking with gas. So I swapped to mirrorless with about 2 years ago. Well, no, how long ago did I say? It was about 6 months. I had a big kind of, I kind of felt very anxious and I didn't quite understand why. And I was like, I don't know, I feel very stressed, but actually I'm doing fine. Like everything's cool. Like my work's going well. This is obviously before coronavirus and everything's going okay. I've just done these cool projects. I'm really proud of them. Cool. But why am I feeling anxious? And I realized I could trace my anxiety back to the amount of kit I owned. And bizarrely, I've for people who know me, you know how much I love kit. For people who don't know me, I have really loved kit pretty much my entire career, right? I used to have like 4...
My name's Tom Barnes and I'm a kit addict.
Mate, Calumet, remember Calumet before they merged with Wex? Calumet in Milton Keynes, I used to go there all the time and they used to know me as the Pro Photo guy because every week I would drive up and I would pick something new up from them, whether it was like a 7B pack or a head extension or a ring flash or like beauty dishes or whatever, and they would see me pretty much every week buying something. I don't know quite why I felt the need to drive to Milton Keynes to pick it up. That's like 100 and something miles, but it was a lovely drive. But I've all through my, and I know you're the same to a certain extent. We love our kit, and for me, what I've realized is that actually for my style and for my lighting and how I want to work, I don't need as much as I thought I did or wanted. So now I'm going down to 2 cameras. Well, there are going to be a couple more lenses, but currently 2 lenses and 3 lights, and then just a bunch of modifiers, and that's it. And I'm kind of cutting down on my heavyweight stands because very rarely need them. Nice to have, but very rarely need them. And so I've gone from having, probably 10, 15, maybe even more cases of kit to now all of my kit, including my digi, my lights, and my stands, now fit in a rucksack and a rolling kit bag. And I could not be more proud. That's it. That's all I got. And it means that I can travel to any shoot. Obviously, there are going to be shoots that I need to hire in stuff, obviously. But I'll hire that in. What's the point in me spending £1,000 on a Manfrotto winder or something when you can rent one for 30 quid a day? I'll do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've now feel infinitely better having got rid of most of my kit.
Yeah.
As does my bank balance.
I think also there's always I'm a bit guilty of this with film cameras. I have a huge amount of. I went through a stage probably about 10 years ago where I started buying up film cameras, and it would get to the point where I'd be like, right, I'm going out, going to be photographing this thing and doing a portrait. I'll just take that camera, because maybe I want to get like a square 120 by 120 portrait, and then I'd be like, oh, but what if I want it in color? Well, maybe I should take that because it's got a different back that I can put on. And then it would get to the point where I'd turn up with about 5 supplementary cameras on top of what I'd actually be using for the job and not use any of them.
Yeah.
Because you've got too much stuff with you. And the fact that you've got too much stuff with you can then start to limit what you can actually achieve because suddenly you're less mobile. And so I think I'm similar to you. I've not fully mirrorless yet. But I have been for the past couple of years really working a lot more with the Fuji film system. And for my kind of travel work, which up until a few months ago was quite a big part of my kind of my jobs, I was traveling with just the Fujis and maybe a Leica M camera. But the Fujis were fantastic because they were mirrorless, so they were lighter, which again made me more mobile. And actually I found that, I've always been a big fan of using primes. If I could get away with it, I would simply go out with just a 35 and a 50. Because, there's that whole adage that the less kit that you have, the more creative you're forced to be because you have to think differently.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes you don't want to risk that on a job, but sometimes it's worth kind of forcing yourself to do that just to kind of shake things up a bit.
Yeah, very much. I think for most of my career, I was using the 24-70, just never really left the camera. And now I'm trying to shoot, just see where the 50 takes me. And it's lovely to then suddenly kind of almost force yourself to have that kind of restriction.
I found that if I used zooms, I would 24-70 again is a fantastic, on a Canon. The Mark II 24-70 is such a sharp lens that it's, you can get away with shooting most stuff with it. But I would find, not so much with that, but if I put on like a 17-40 or a wide angle lens, I would just find that eventually I'd suddenly creep to the widest possible setting without realizing it. And then I'd be sat in the edit later going, what the hell was I thinking? Everything's at like 17 mil.
Everything's so far away.
Distorted as hell. So I had to stop using kind of those wide lenses because I hate stuff that's over. I don't hate, that's a strong word, but I
hate stuff that's wide.
Don't like it. It's particularly wide. I feel like it's very difficult to make it work well, and it's very often used in a way that just doesn't look aesthetically pleasing for my eye anyway.
It's a very uncomfortable. I find that things that are wider than 28 are like a very uncomfortable perspective, especially when you start going past lower than 20. I'm like, oh, good Lord. Everything's distorted. Everything's pinched. Not that I'm a dinosaur. I'm well aware that there are wide lenses, but I don't know. I just don't very often see them used well.
So you don't own a fisheye then, I take it?
I used to. Fisheyes for me are like GoPros. I have a love-hate relationship. And when I used to use Canon years ago, I would buy one, go, oh, it's super cool. I look like I'm shooting like 80s skate videos, wicked. And then I would sell it because, funnily enough, there wasn't many commissions for 80s skate videos. So I would then sell it. And then I would buy it again 6 months later, convincing myself I'd use it. Did the same thing with
certain
GoPros
bits of kit. Certain bits of kit like the fisheye, which if you think about it throughout the years, like if I was to think off the top of my head, I can think of maybe one really iconic photo that was a shot with a fisheye, which is probably Muhammad Ali standing over an opponent that he's just knocked out, and it was photographed from directly above the boxing ring, and it's like a fantastic use of a fisheye.
Yeah.
But aside from that, there's not many. I'm sure there are others, and people might write in to tell me. But generally,
yes, please,
write in,
listeners, please write in. We don't have a mailing address, but still.
I mean, we only accept correspondence if it's written with a quill. No?
We do, and sealed with wax. So make sure you get the red wax out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like they're just a bit. I like the Canon had a like a 8 to 13 or 8 to 14. Actually, it was maybe a bit longer than that. But they had a zoomable fisheye, which I thought was cool. 8 to 15, I think it was. I'll probably get corrected on that. But that was cool. That was like a nice idea. But I don't know. I've never really seen them being used that much. Like,
no. So now you've pared your kit right down. You're using, what is it you're using at the moment?
Right. So I did say, I'm trying to keep it all lightweight. I'm shooting mirrorless. The mirrorless I'm using is the Leica SL2, which is heavier than myself. But I have just sold the 50mm 1.4 lens and swapped over to the 50mm f2, which is considerably lighter. But yeah, I'm kind of in love with it, which is the first time I've swapped systems. I think I've probably talked about it a little bit in the past. I've swapped systems a lot over the past couple of years, and going back to that, always wanting to. I don't know. For me, it's always been like, I'm not good enough. It must be the kit. What is that person using? So I've had the Fuji medium format, the Phase 1 medium format, Leaf, the old Mamiya stuff. I've had Canon, Sony, Nikon at some point, all sorts of stuff. And I think what I was kind of projecting, and I was more going, actually, the problem is not the camera. The problem may be the guy behind it who's trying. It's like in my early days of my career, I just went, I'll buy 15 lights. That'll be it. That'll fix everything. That'll be what I need. And you kind of go, well, actually, most of your stuff needs 2, maybe 3 max.
I think it's a common syndrome known as GAS, isn't it? Gear acquisition syndrome.
It is. And that's why the photography industry has been doing so well for years.
We all suffer from it at points when you start to doubt yourself. You convince yourself that if you just buy this bit of kit, it's going to change the way that you shoot. And to some degree, it can, but probably going to be short-lived.
Yeah, and it's never as much as you think. Like, I don't want to be, obviously at some point it'd be nice to get the podcast sponsored, but I'm not going to be like, just don't stop buying equipment, everyone. Like, stop it. The chances are, the stuff you really want, you don't need. And it's a thing with most photographers, even the guys who don't like gear, they still like gear to a little bit of a point. We still got to get that dopamine hit. Like, we'd still love it when we kind of unpack a new light or a new lens or something. But it never does what we want.
Yeah, it does get fetishized.
Oh, very much so. Again, with the fetish stuff, man. But yeah, no, it's a funny one. I don't know. For me, I just thought I had to have everything that I saw everyone using. And it turns out, actually, if you're comfortable who you are, comfortable with what you're shooting, you need the stuff that's right for you. And I don't want to be the guy. Like, I'm 35 now. I want to have a really long career. Like, I really want to enjoy this. Like, photography, I don't want to sound like I'm going super like arty and wanky and whatnot, but like, photography for me has afforded me the opportunities to meet some of the most amazing people. Some are less amazing, but mostly people have been absolutely incredible and amazing. And they're not situations you'd ever find yourself in if, say, for example, you were an accountant. You don't tend to find yourself in a refugee camp in the middle of nowhere. If you are very good at doing books. I'm not said that it doesn't happen, but it's probably a bit rarer than a photographer turning up. And for me, I've had the most amazing experiences through photography that I want this to last. I don't want to stop working. Like, I want to be doing this when I'm 90. I want to have geriatricphotographer.com. And I'm going to be that guy kind of wheeling myself out. And I will have bolted lights and kind of, grip arms onto my wheelchair and stuff.
Bill Cunningham, was he still riding around New York doing his street stuff, wasn't he?
I'm
well
all
into
about
his old
that.
age.
Like, I love that guy. Like, he is what, 85, 90 years old, isn't he? And he's the guy who
I thought he was dead.
Oh, well, that would be very awkward. Hang on, let me write this down.
Quick Google.
Yeah, right. Well, okay. Well, I'm just going to talk about how much I've enjoyed it. And yeah, it's. I don't want to get to 40 and then be lumped with a grip truck of stuff that I have to have 15 assistants to carry around to shoot a kind of a one light setup. I don't want to be that guy. So if I can keep my kit lightweight and I can keep my stuff as small as possible, hopefully I'll be able to continue doing this till long.
Well, I think as well, like kit is becoming so much more lightweight. Yeah, I think kit is becoming so much more lightweight in general. If you look at the, we were talking before we came on air about the kind of exciting chats we have, the ProPhoto B1 versus the B10 Plus.
See, I personally think this is a very exciting chat because a few years ago when ProPhoto released the B1, up until that point, the only way of getting that amount of power in something so small, there was no option. You had to bring out a pack and a head. That was the only way of doing it. Trust me, I had so many 7B packs and B3s and all that. Then they brought this out and I was like, oh my God, this is game changing.
I find it, and I think it's amazing because it gives you so many kind of creative options. But I also wonder if we are kind of heading towards, I don't think it's an if, it's just a when. We're heading towards a point where camera sensors are going to be so good that the idea of flash photography is a thing of the past, and everyone will be using constant lighting because probably people won't know how to use flash or understand that side of things in the same way that people have stopped, shooting film as much or kind of other aspects of photography that aren't necessary anymore. There'll still be people doing it, but the vast majority won't be doing it because they won't have to. So lighting will still be as important in creating mood because obviously it's a visual medium and you look at cinema, but even, for example, with cinema, there are films now that get made and the lighting crew is minimal because they don't have the budget for it and the camera sensors are so good that actually they just use a little bit of supplementary lighting, but otherwise they stick with everything as it is in the frame, whereas it used to be a huge setup to just film one scene, and the amount of stuff that you'd have to get in. If you look at a Hitchcock movie, the amount of lighting that would have been involved in something, or camera movement, the amount of tech and gear that would have been involved in a camera movement. And now the same thing you could do with a gimbal that you can buy for a couple of £100.
500 quid, yeah. It's bonkers, it really is. But it's interesting you talk about films that have been made with no lighting. The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hardy. Is it The Revenant? I think it's called The Revenant. If it's not, I'm sure someone will correct me. But that is
the film with the bear.
That's the one, yeah. The bear one.
Love seeing the bear.
That's the one, yeah. But that was the only shot in that entire film that used artificial lighting was a fireside shot. I've watched this fantastic kind of behind the scenes documentary on it. Wow. And they basically just didn't use anything. They used some reflectors from time to time, but like most of it, completely natural light, no artificial apart from one shot. And I was like, that's awesome. And I think we're probably at that point with camera sensors. I was talking with a photographer friend and he said, I take a shot and I had it in my mind what I was going for. But then when it comes into post, it's got so much latitude. I can push, pull, create all of this stuff, can create so many different looks out of it that I kind of forget where I started off. And I personally going to say, I don't know how, I think Flash is probably here to stay because Flash for me has some very unique properties that you cannot get with constant light in as small a package as possible. I'm sure, light is light. At the same time, I feel that people who are very keen to kind of cross over moving image and the stills world, it was like that argument a few years ago when people were like, "Oh, can't you just pull a still from the camera?" And you kind of go, "Well, it's not quite how it works." The shutter speed on a cine camera is considerably lower than what we would need to freeze motion.
And also the way you frame for filming is totally different to the frame you do for a still image.
Exactly. So I feel like there's always going to be a place for the flash. For me personally, I love it. I will always try and use flash. For me, it's just, I don't know, it just gives me something, and it's much easier to bring out a couple of B10s or B10 pluses than it is to bring out the equivalent powered constant light, because then we're talking about big HMIs, big generators, stuff like that. So I think there'll always be a place for it.
Yeah, and I think it was Emmanuel Lubetsky, wasn't it? Chivo, who's the to go back to the Revenant, he's the director of photography. The cinematographer for that. And to say, that it's natural light is strictly true, but if you look at the way it was filmed, it would have been, they probably only filmed during magic hour for most scenes.
I'll have to try and find this thing.
It's Tree of Life by Terrence Malick was very similar. It's such a beautifully shot film, but in order to shoot it that way, there's a main house that's featured in the film, and I think they built 5 versions of the same set house, just at different angles, so that it would have different sunlight in different rooms at certain times of the day. So it's using natural light isn't. I guess what we're saying is using natural light isn't a cop out in that sense. It's because you still have to have what it goes with what you were saying. You still have to have the intention of how you want it to look. You
still have to control it.
That's important. Yeah,
you still have to control it. For the listeners, I found that behind the scenes feature about the Revenant, and I'll put it in the show notes, because it's definitely worth a watch. If you even just to see kind of how the crew struggled to get some of those insane locations. It's fascinating.
I think cinematography in general is such an amazing area for photographers to get inspiration from, and I also think it's really interesting for people to understand, when you look at a film team and how big a film team can be compared to a stills team. I was on a shoot last year in Indonesia, and there was a film side to the campaign and a still side to the campaign, and I think my team was myself and my first. We flew out from the UK, and then a local team of 5 or 6 people, and the film side they had a crew of 120. Now, ultimately, the film is going to be made and it's going to be seen by a lot of people, but it's kind of limited to its platforms, whereas the stills potentially are on billboards, they're in social, they're in magazines, and yet it's interesting how with filming people kind of expect it is a much bigger production, so people understand it and expect it, but with stills sometimes people just think, why do you need all this lighting, or why do you need this? And yet they are very similar mediums. It's just that one of them happens to be slightly more complicated because the person has to move through the scene in a way that the lighting has to change with it. But I think generally you can learn so much from observing a good cinematographer work and a good film crew, gaff crew lighting something, and it's so fascinating to see. I think we're in an exciting time with the way that technology is making us less reliant on tech and more able to just focus on the creative. Yeah, at least I hope that's where it's going.
No, I think you're right. I mean, for me personally, the realization that I could get all of my kit down into this incredibly small pack basically means that I know exactly where all my kit is at every possible time. It also means that I'm not constantly looking for the next purchase. I'm kind of going, actually, I need to create this, and that's what I want to create, as opposed to going, oh, that lens will probably help me create that, because I buy that lens, I'd never get around to actually doing what I intended with it. So I feel now that technology, at the beginning of your career or when you start buying kit, it really helps your creativity because everything's new. Then you get to a point in your career where actually it starts to stifle your creativity. And then when you've realized that, you get rid of a load of kit, and then it almost starts, because of the technological advances and stuff, it starts to help your creativity again. And I feel that now, luckily for me, I feel that's the point I'm at, that I feel kind of almost rejuvenated, because I've got my freedom back almost, because I now can just rock up anywhere with the same amount of kit and not have to worry about destroying my body, lugging all those massive, huge great packs and stuff around with the lead
Yeah.
batteries. God. But, you know,
So,
go on, sorry.
so having said all that, then, what do you think would be your desert island camera?
Oh, mate,
If
now
you're
we're talking. Oh, should we talk about gear? Oh, love cameras, me. So I'll tell you straight up, the best camera I've ever owned, Leica Q2. Hands
okay,
down. I have never enjoyed shooting. I've always had a camera with me over the years, always, you know, whether it was a Nikon FM2 that I stupidly had my logo engraved onto the top of it, which utterly decimated its secondhand value, or whether it was a
find
Canon.
someone else with the initial TP.
Yeah, exactly. Someone's bought it as well. Someone really paid good top whack for it, which was bizarre. So if you've got that camera, I would love to buy it back from you at some point, because it turns out it's become quite a turning point in my career. So, you know, if you're listening, sell it back to me, please. I will give you £4 for it.
But someone just scratching TP into the top
right.
of the
It has to. Well, I know the serial number of it. It's a proper one. But then for over the years, I've obviously had cameras with me, as we all do, cameras with me at all times, and I've had loads. I mean, hundreds. You look through my, like, I have a daily camera, and I look back through the kind of the archive, and there must be Nikon DFs, Canon 5Ds, Canon 6Ds, Fuji, all sorts of Nikon stuff. You know, you name it, it's been in there probably. Sony's, all sorts. And I've never loved using them. And then even when I've loved using them, I've never loved the pictures. And if I've loved the pictures, chances are I've probably never loved using it. And because I never loved using it, I'd never carry it with me. So it would just sit on a shelf, which I'm sure you've probably been guilty of as well. We buy something, go, oh, I'll definitely use that all the time. Never do. And the Leica Q2, I owned the Q. And I was like, this is the best camera I've ever had in my life. I love it. Like, full on. You probably can't tell in my voice, but I'm like, damn, I love this camera. This is like so good. And it had the look I was after. I love the 28. The lens is wonderful. And the Wi-Fi that I can just pull them off my phone, so I can just quickly edit them up and send them over to friends and whatnot. It's wonderful. And then I got the SL2, and I realized that if I got the Q2, the camera that I always have on me, and I do have it always on me because I love it, and I love the pictures, and I love using it. So it's that kind of like perfect combination that means it's always around my neck, or on my side. It uses the same chip as the SL2, so the files are the same size. So if I needed to, for example, when I'm flying and I wanted to include a shot taken out the window in the project, for example, it's the same resolution as my full-on working camera, and they use the same batteries. So I'm all about slimming down on kit. They use the same charger. Great. Less charges.
I'm a bit like that with the Fuji kit, I guess, because the although it's changing slightly now, so I might get this wrong, but for a long time I was shooting with the X-T3, the X Pro 2, and the X100F, and they all use the same battery, and they have similar sensors. So even though the 100F is a tiny little thing that you can, you know, just I always have on me, I know it will marry up when I take it into capture and start processing it. I can get a very similar look. But having said that, I think if I were to pick my desert island camera, it would probably be my Widelux, which is an old Japanese panoramic swing lens film camera.
Yeah, but you say that. Go on Greg's Instagram, which is at Greg Fennell, and he has got some lovely black and white shots. Is it Halong Bay?
Halong Bay, in Vietnam. Yeah.
And you took some great shots on the Widelux, because weirdly, I was looking at that earlier and going, God, I wonder what took that, because that's a lovely, lovely shot. So
it's such a unique camera. It's very, and that's the reason I've held on to it, and I love it to bits. I picked it up in Hong Kong years ago, and it's a camera that I always take with me on assignment as my personal little camera, and I'll always try and shoot a roll if I can, because the pictures that I get out of that are so unique. I mean, there's a horror story from an assignment a few years ago, which we won't get into here. It'll be for another episode, where a lab actually destroyed all my negatives from a shoot with a very remote tribe in Tanzania. And so I have the very low res scans from that camera, and they look amazing. but they're tiny res, and the
that's
negs have
awful.
gone.
That's like proper like taunting that you've got the low res. Oh man.
Yeah, that was a very ugly situation as well. It got very a very unpleasant back and forth that went on there as well with the lab in question.
Tune in next week for when Greg names that lab.
So yeah, but the camera, the Widelux, is so unique. It is it's built like a tank. And if anyone's interested in seeing a really good example of it, I didn't realize this. Years ago, I photographed Jeff Bridges, did a portrait of him, and I didn't realize at the time that he used the Widelux quite widely, and he actually used to shoot a whole like series of images on every film that he was on purely on the Widelux, and then create a book from each film. So if you look up True Grit kind of Widelux, you'll find some of Jeff Bridges' work. And if you go on Jeff Bridges' website, there's a whole subsection on the Widelux, like on the technical side of the Widelux, and kind of like quirks with it, how to use it, and all this stuff. It's a fantastic camera. It's a real cult camera. It's really difficult to work with. It's really it's simple to use, but it's really difficult to get a good frame out of it because it just includes so much. It includes 140-degree panorama. Mm-hmm. So you are getting all sorts of legs and bits and whatever sticking into your frame. And the mad thing is that if you are taking a picture at, say, a 15th of a second, the actual lens takes over 2 seconds to rotate fully. So what you're getting on the left of frame,
the lens rotates.
Yeah. So it's all clockwork and springs. Oh God! When that needs to be serviced, I don't know what I'm going to do with it because I don't know anyone who can service a camera like that.
I'll do it for you.
If anyone knows,
screwdriver
please write in. Yeah. But yeah, so what you photograph on the left of the frame is actually going to be 2 seconds ahead of what happens on the right side of the frame, and so then you're totally messing with the idea of the photo being the decisive moment, because rather than actually getting 250th of a second in the snap of the fingers, what you're capturing is a period of time but in a still image. That's which is bizarre. Just mind-blowing.
Now
it's not that mind-blowing, but I mean it's a type of thing that you could probably sit and think about if you were really high for quite a long time.
I mean, I love that. Here's one for you though. I've got an eBay page up with them, seeing how much they go for now. How much did you pay for yours?
I paid about. Oh God, I paid in Hong Kong dollars, I think, but I think it worked out to about 400 quid.
You've doubled your money at least. A good one, a mint one, will now set you back roughly between 800 to 1,500 quid.
Yeah, I mean they aren't made anymore, so they're dying out, and obviously because there's so few people that can service them, I think when they die out, they just kind of unfortunately end up on the kind of the rubbish heap of cameras that are out there, which is a shame because it's such a beautiful piece of kit and it's such a unique way of working. And for me, if I had to just have one camera for the rest of my life, I think it would be such an interesting challenge just to shoot with that. I do realise that I did really slate wide lenses earlier and then have just waxed lyrical about this amazing shot on your Instagram. But the funny thing is, I mean, because it's a revolving lens, it doesn't have the, as long as you get the horizon level, it doesn't have the distortion that you get from a wide angle lens, because It's not a wide angle lens, it's a rotating lens, and that's different. It just produces a wide angle image. And that's what's so wonderful about them. There's a Russian camera called the Horizon, which is very similar, but slightly lesser in terms of quality, I believe. And then if you were to look at something like the X-Pan, the Hasselblad X-Pan also is a panoramic camera, but is a cropped image rather than a rotating lens. So the Widelux really is quite unique in that sense.
If you wanted to try one out, the Horizon camera is considerably cheaper. You're paying about 90 quid for that.
I mean, I rent mine out.
Well, here we go. Fat llama, here we come.
It happens to be, $5,000 a day.
I'll pay that. I see that. So that would be your Desert Island camera, and then obviously the people who've been listening, and thank you very much, by the way, for listening.
Yes.
We also do our Desert Island books.
Yeah.
What would you have? I would imagine yours are probably considerably more highbrow than mine.
See, I've cheated a bit. So I found this very difficult. I went down to my bookshelf downstairs,
The library.
which is it's been so rewarding finally getting a nice shelf to have all of the books properly on. My wife is kind of constantly saying, "Please don't buy any more photography books."
So it's mine.
But I mean, a lot of my books are more photojournalistic based. I picked out a few, and I've got one that I will pick as my favorite, I think. But the first one I picked up was my Larry Burrows Vietnam book, which is sorry for listeners, I'm just showing Tom the copy here.
That's an awesome cover.
It's an excellent book by a very, very underrated photographer from the Vietnam War. What I found quite interesting, and the reason I thought I'd mention this, was I'd not noticed this before, but there's a whole series of images in here of sleeping soldiers. And it really reminded me of a project that Tim Hetherington did in Afghanistan of sleeping soldiers. And I just love the idea of this kind of tract of photography kind of continuing through time, because Larry Burrows unfortunately died in a helicopter crash in Vietnam, and they only recently discovered the crash site, and they were able to identify it because they found the base plate to his Leica with a serial number. Wow. And there's a whole book about this search for his body for years, because he died along with a number of other photographers during the invasion of Laos towards the end of the Vietnam War. And he was incredibly, I think if he'd survived the war, he would have just gone from strength to strength. Very compassionate photographer, really ahead of his time. There's stuff in here of he shot half in and half outside. I mean, I'll try and link in the show notes to it, but of tracer fire coming outside of what they used to call Puff the Magic Dragons, which were C-130s with Gatling guns on them, firing tracer. And they would arc around, you can tell I did war studies, they can arc around a target. And he mounted the camera in the door and was able to get an half inside the cockpit shot, half outside of the tracer fire shot. And we're talking about 1960s color photography, which was still in its early days. So he was very technically minded and kind of put that across in his work. But of course, next to that, I then found this book, which is Requiem, which was put together by, I think it was Horst Fass Tim Page. And it is a series of images by photographers who died in Vietnam, both North Vietnamese photographers as well, which are very frequently kind of underrepresented when it comes to looking at the history of that conflict. And so that's a really interesting book, and it's very poignant. And I actually did my dissertation at university on the Vietnam War with regards to photojournalism. So for me, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to that part of history, and that book is just really interesting. But when it comes to my actual desert island book, again, unfortunately, there's still two, so I need to whittle it down. This one, and again, we'll link to all of these in the show notes. This one, I'm not sure if it's still in print, but it's fantastic. It's called Things as They Are. It's by Chris Boot. As a publisher. It's a well-pressed photo, and it's basically photojournalism in context since 1955. It is full of amazing magazine spreads from that actually appeared in magazines, and it has copies of all of the magazines as the images appeared in them, so scans of the mags and context about how it ran. And each decade it has the winning world press photos at the beginning of that chapter, and it's just a really interesting book to look at, to get a sense of how photography throughout the ages has changed, how poignant and important photojournalism has been throughout the ages in creating some of the most iconic kind of images that we know. And I just think it's the type of book that you could spend all day looking at. So I thought that'd be quite good on a desert island.
Yeah, very smart.
But in that vein, I think the winner for me is this beast, which is Magnum Stories by Faden.
That is the thickest photo book I've ever seen.
Well, that's the other thing. I thought it would be good because it's a lot to get through.
You'd never get bored.
And it is full of picture essays, but not only the picture essays, it has the context for the essays. It has interviews with the photographers. It has letters that were written. It has scrapbooks. It has all sorts of stuff included. So you get an awful lot of context behind each story. And for me, again, it's really fascinating to understand context when it comes to photography and to photojournalism. And it's because it's Magnum Photo Agency. You know, say what you will about Magnum Photo Agency, it certainly had an interesting, controversial history in some senses, but it's also been an amazing and wonderful kind of breeding ground for ideas and amazing photography. And this book has just got a cross section of that work. So it's really varied. It's very representative in some ways, and it is just a beast. So yeah, it would take up a lot of my time on the island.
It is a beast. Quite how you get it to the island. You'd need a crane.
I'd float on it.
You'd float on it, yeah, right. My books are considerably less highbrow. Yours are very serious, very nice, lovely, proper photo books.
You'd be like Terry Richards' Terry Wild.
No, absolutely not. For the record, not a fan of his work, and I think he's not a good role model for photographers. If you model yourself on him, get yourself in the bin. So,
well said.
Anyway, back to my book. So it's not a Terry Richardson book. It is LAPD 53. So a lot of my favorite books are crime scene stuff. So
yes, because for regular listeners, you will remember you mentioned Ouija before.
Yeah. So this one, the LAPD 53 by James Elroy and Glyn Martin for the LA Police Museum. It's basically a run through of different crime scenes, how they shot it, how the process of photographing crime scenes in the 1950s worked. And it's super, super interesting. But the reason I chose it for this is because it really does lead on to my favorite book of all time. I know it makes me sound like super like gory because they're all just crime scene photos of bodies.
Both books have pictures of dead bodies on the front.
Sorry, yeah. This is, I'm holding it up, it's Ouija, Murder is My Business. And it is, Ouija for me is like such a fascinating story. I know he's a photographer, obviously, but he's such a fascinating story because, you know, everyone has seen the photographs in the 1960s of people sat in the cinema with the guy who just walked in with a camera with a flash, boom, took it. Everyone knows that picture. That's Ouija. So he did the crime scene stuff. He photographed Marilyn Monroe. He had, he got this nickname because he turned up, for people who didn't hear the previous episode, he lost all his money in a game of craps and then lived in the dark room in the newspaper. I'm fairly certain this is right. And then when the ticker tape went off, normally all the other papers had to wait until they got in the morning, picked up the ticker tape, and then would go to the crime scenes. But he would get woken up by the ticker machine because news like that used to come in over the ticker, and he would then grab the ticker tape and would go to the crime scene. So often he would turn up before the police did. Hence his photographs of crime scenes. They're about as fresh a crime scene as they could possibly be. And it's fascinating. It's a fascinating book. Not, however, that good if you are, I don't know, squeamish or don't like crime scenes or don't like stuff like that.
I love the way you said about a fresh crime scene. Like you're kind of well, that's it's not a very good crime scene. It's not fresh.
It's a bit of a crusty crime scene. It's not a fan. Not a fan. I also have. I'm very proud. My amazing wife, who is truly amazing, bought me a first edition Annie Leibovitz big book. I can't remember the title of it, but it's a signed first print limited. So it's one of the first 100 off the shelf. Oh my God! How on earth did I forget this? I've got one of the I got a Black Panther book, which has got to be my favorite. Oh God, I can't remember.
Yeah, you showed that to me before. I was surprised you hadn't picked this.
Yeah, so it's in the box still. That's
and
why
it's beautifully presented. That book, isn't it?
Let me see if I can find it. God, it's honestly so. I bought it was Howard L. Bingham's Black Panthers 1968. That it's such an amazing book. It is so beautifully presented. And from the story I read in the book is that he, I I think it was Time magazine maybe, had commissioned him to, they wanted to commission a story about the Black Panthers, and the Black Panthers rallied around and said, right, we'll allow it, but only if you let Howard L. Bingham shoot it. And then after he'd shot these incredible images, been embedded with them for ages, got these amazing images, there was a falling out, so the pictures never ran. The feature never ran. So
that's mad.
Howard L. Bingham then released this book, and bizarrely, I bought it off, I think my wife bought it off Amazon for 40 quid or something. But then it turned up, sealed, in the cardboard box, numbered, signed. And I was like, oh. And so whoever the book stockist who'd obviously ended up with it had no idea what they were selling. And so we have like, I think 76 out of 500 or something signed, and it was all sealed in the plastic wrapper. And I had to break the wrapper and read it, because that's what books are for, right? I'm not one of these guys to get a toy and keep it in the packaging.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say that it's possibly one of the most stunning, cool collections of work I've ever seen. And the fact that it just randomly turned up and it was a limited edition of the first run signed in the box. It's such a, I can't even begin to tell you. It's so beautifully presented. It's one of the most amazing, wonderful books I've ever been given. It's so incredible. Sorry, Annie. Your book's good, don't get me wrong, but this Howard L. Bingham one
second
is
best.
Second best. But also, I do also have a book by Andrew Shaler called The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. And they... Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
I remember this. This came out about 10, 15 years ago. 2001,
yeah, it must have been about that.
I remember seeing this in a magazine when it first came out.
Honestly, it's so awesome. It is access like you wouldn't believe to the proper Hells Angels, and they are some of the coolest portraits. And they look, they're gnarly dudes.
It's got reportage in it as well.
It does, yeah. It has everything you'd want in a Hells Angels photo book. So
it reminds me a bit of the kind of Jocelyn Bain Hogg's book, The Firm, where he kind of hung out with East End gangsters, and you just the access, that you have to kind of put yourself through to get those images is insane.
Man, I couldn't even know where to begin. It's amazing access. It really is. But yeah, so those would be... Sorry, I do feel like we've kind of cheated, really, because all our guests bring on one book. But because we're the hosts, we can do what we want.
Yeah, we made the rules.
I've bought 17. So
I'm going to build my house on the island out of books.
That's it.
So we'll link to all of those in the show notes, and it'd be great actually going forward. I mean, hopefully this episode has been kind of interesting to you guys. We'll be back. Normal service will resume with guests on the next episode, but we will do these intermittently where it's just the two of us. And we'd love to get some feedback from listeners as to what they would like us to discuss, what they'd like us to talk about. We've got plans of things that we definitely want to, go over. But if you've got any ideas, please do reach out. You can email us, or you can write, but we haven't got a post box. You can email us at info@exposednegative.com. And obviously you can find us over on Instagram and Twitter as well. Twitter is @exposednegative and Instagram is @xnegative.
That's right. Sorry, yeah, that's and if you want to find us personally, Greg is @Greg Fennell. That's FUNNELL, and I am @tombarnes.com. That's DOTCOM at the end. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you, really, because all the feedback we've got so far has been, I think we've been a bit surprised at how positive it's been. So if you'd like to leave reviews on Apple Podcasts and things like that, obviously it all helps. And yeah, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. See what's going on, really. Is that the end? How do you end one of these ones where it's just us talking? I guess we're just gonna
get up and close the door.
Yeah, right. Can you imagine that clunk? Oh, we're done now. No, well, listen, from both of us, thank you ever so much for taking the time to listen. When we started this, literally 5 or 6 episodes ago, we didn't know if anyone would listen, and we're kind of really surprised by the numbers. So we'd love to keep going, and as long as you keep listening, we'll keep doing them. So thank you ever so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one.
Take care, guys.